Welcome to Zero Duality. And on this episode, we're going to explore the duality within non-duality. And so, if you're watching this, it's probably because you're interested in non-duality. And you yourself may have read the great masters of the traditional non-duality practices, ones that extend far back as centuries ago and are steeped in myth and tradition and principles and virtues that are on a path towards an enlightenment of some sort. Or you may have found non-duality on YouTube, where YouTubers explain what non-duality is, what it may mean, why, how, and the like. But they may not be tied to any tradition or sect or sets of values. And so we find that there is a duality within non-duality. And it doesn't dawn on either side that a duality exists within their non-duality practices. And that is, on the traditional side, we find that there's the boundaries, the confines of teachings handed down from generation to generation. So those teachings, what they do is tend to bring order. An order that is established when one becomes like the tradition, acts within the tradition, answers what the tradition begs you to answer, and one can only ask questions that the tradition has answers for. And so with that order comes a lack of freedom. A lack of freedom to explore outside of those boundaries. And the explanation for why non-duality is a fact that must be learned, is tied to an authority, whether it be a figure from long ago or a master, guru, someone who knows. And then we find the rebellion, the reaction against the traditional way, which is non-duality, where anything goes, where the self is an abstract concept, so there is no order in that freedom. A freedom that is based on knowledge, memory, and experience, but it derives from teachings not fully understood or cared to be understood. And so there is a discussion on there being no self, no values to reach for, no principles to be had, no order to be set upon oneself by an authority. We find that it's a popular reaction against the rebellion of authority or of Western thought, and it tends to be scattered. As in, is there a breakdown? Is there an explanation? Is there a looking together? And sometimes there is an explanation, but they tend to be explanations that don't go very deep. And so duality persists, fragmentation persists, where one explains, and why is it so? Well, because one believes so. Because that's what one experiences. That's what one's state is, state of being. And if one doesn't like it, then, well, they can look elsewhere. And certainly YouTube allows us to look elsewhere. Find all the knowledge, memory, and experience of all the non-dualists. And such a freedom, just like the order from the traditional side, has never fundamentally changed human beings. Never fundamentally changed humankind at all. Humankind has set for itself an ever expanse using the limited nature of thought. And so where there's limitation, there must be conflict. And so the traditionalists can never extend out beyond their tradition. And let's say the non-traditionalists can never put together a sense of order and looking together, peer to peer. And perhaps this is why. Perhaps it has to do with the nature of money. You see, money has been individuated and separated for centuries. And so perhaps the confines of a monastery, it is easier to suggest that money is not of importance. But when out in the world of trade, of economies and socioeconomic matters, money becomes a reality, which necessarily conditions non-duality practice. Because simply looking can never be enough. Is there a response which is both effective, demonstrating non-duality's effectiveness, as well as pointing out the ineffectiveness of the individuated and separated manner of living? Essentially, a mechanical way of life. Because mechanisms, do they not require pieces, parts, and order in terms of logic? 1, 2, 3, A, B, C. And so we've set ourselves up, the human being, all of us, have set ourselves up for what is looking like now a problem that is going to be very difficult to resolve for, which is the machine or the computer becoming sophisticated enough to reason for itself. A purely mechanical process. And so, Zero Duality is a practice of which involves an inquiry together, a looking together. But as it stands now, it has to be somewhat catered towards the average viewer, who in all areas in life is individuated and separated. What I believe, what I know, what my experience is, so on and so on. A continuous comparison between like and dislike, believe, disbelieve, and so on. So the looking together can't take place unless, of course, there is the resolution in terms of financial communication, which is something that could be heralded through technology itself. Zero Duality meets the reality of the modern world, which is a continuation of the knowledge, memory, and experience of the prior world. The only difference being is we have technology now. But humankind has essentially stayed the same. Wars, conflicts, fear, poverty, and all these problems generally that most people look through with a lens of conditionality. A Democrat when they hear injustice, sees it one way. A Republican, when they see injustice or hear injustice, they see it another way. So injustice is always sought to be solved outwardly, when inwardly there is inevitably a connection there. So the change has to be simultaneous. And it's a very difficult thing for a human being to look inwardly. Very difficult. Considering all the pressures, the stresses, the expectations of daily living. And to look inwardly without the conditioning of the past. You see, usually when one hears look inwardly, one goes ahead and looks through the catalog of memory, of all the hurts, the pains, the fears, the injustices. But rather, is there a looking inwardly, where there is no separation between the inner and the outer? Such a look inwardly, then, on what basis can there be an order derived from? Can it be that throughout this period in time, humanity, utilizing knowledge, memory, and experience, dividing itself up in roles, have come upon, through the scientists, an understanding of the fundamental laws of nature, of which can provide a quality to observation, a fundamental quality of perception, one that's not fragmented, broken, or born of the past. So wing zero duality, its order, its consistency is derived from the fundamental laws of nature, but its freedom is still intact. Because knowledge, memory, and experience is a part of reality. There can't be a duality between the ending of knowledge, memory, and experience and knowledge, memory, and experience. There is another duality there. So a complete, whole, non-dualistic approach necessarily includes knowledge, memory, and experience.